and thank you for tuning in to learn more about fraternities at Tulane. My name is Liz Schaefer, and I serve as the Director of Fraternity and Sorority Programs. I am proud to work with the 40% of full-time undergraduate students here who belong to one of our 22 Greek letter social organizations. Our department is part of the Division of Student Affairs, and our staff is dedicated to providing an exceptional fraternity and sorority experience to our students. To name just a few of the things we do, we provide training to chapter and council officers on issues of organizational management, work with national fraternity and sorority staff and local volunteers to support chapters, give guidance on program and event planning, and collaborate with various campus departments to provide resources and programming on topics such as violence prevention, health and wellness, recreation, and academic support. In this tutorial, we will answer the questions we most commonly hear from parents of students who are considering joining a fraternity. Of course, if after viewing the tutorial you still have questions, please don't hesitate to contact our staff. Tulane has 10 fraternities, each of which is affiliated with a national fraternity. The university affiliate groups are called chapters, so you will hear us and your students refer to either their fraternity or their chapter. All of these groups are grounded in values centered on brotherhood, scholarship, leadership, and service. It's important to note that these are all private organizations that have individual criteria for membership. The university does not control these criteria or how the chapters apply them. Each fraternity chapter at Tulane belongs to a student-run, staff-advised governing council. The councils are made up of chapters that are similar in size and do similar activities. You can see on your screen the names of each of our fraternities and the councils to which they belong. We have one historically black fraternity, which is part of our National Pan-Hellenic Council, or NPHC. They currently have 2 members. Our other 9 fraternities belong to our Interfraternity Council, or IFC. These groups currently average in size at 55. 7 of the IFC fraternities have houses, all of which are owned and managed by either local alumni of the fraternity or by the individual fraternity's National Housing Corporation. These facilities house between 7 and 10 members. The only time a member may be required to live in the fraternity house is if he eventually serves in a particular chapter office, such as president or treasurer. The fraternities primarily use the houses as meeting spaces and a home away from home for their members. 4 of the fraternities provide a limited meal plan for their members at the chapter house, each with a professional chef. The university's dining services office allows members of these fraternities, including new first-year members, to drop down to a less expensive campus-based meal plan that offers a small number of meals. Many parents wonder about the time commitment that joining a fraternity will bring. Like so many things in life, your son will get out of the fraternity what he puts into it. If he chooses to get involved with committees and events early on, he will spend a bit more time. But on average, most new members should expect to spend 5 to 10 hours per week attending new member education sessions to learn about the organization's history, chapter business meetings, and brotherhood or social events. If your son is already involved in one or more other student organizations, his new fraternity will view that as a benefit, not a hindrance. We require each fraternity to submit to us a detailed plan for their new member education and orientation program. Once we approve that plan, we require the organization's officers to send a copy of it to all new members. We encourage you to ask your son to send it to you so you will have a good idea of the chapter events and activities he will be attending. All our fraternities consider academic achievement to be an essential part of membership. The average GPA of Greek members has been higher than that of non-Greek members for at least the last 15 years, and the fraternities compete fiercely with one another for the highest grades. You can view the GPA standings for each organization on our website, greek.tulane.edu, under the About Our Community heading. The costs of fraternity membership are listed on your screen. They vary somewhat by council, and the variance is based on a number of factors, including the size of the group, the number and type of activities they plan each year, and whether or not they have a house or sometimes provide meals for members. Regardless, it's important to note that the first semester of membership is more expensive because of one-time new member fees. Your son will also pay a Greek membership fee to the university each semester via his accounts receivable bill. The fee covers things in 3 basic categories: educational programming for members, social and community programming, and neighborhood relations. As you are probably aware, the university sets and maintains eligibility requirements of students who wish to join a fraternity or sorority. The requirements are straightforward and are listed on your screen. A couple of important notes, though. First is that we hold hard and fast to the minimum requirements and do not make exceptions to them. That means that if your son earns a 2.499 GPA, which is not a 2.5, he will not be able to participate. It also means that if he completes only 10 hours in the first semester, but Tulane accepted 3 advanced placement credits before he entered, he will be able to participate. We take a hard line on the requirements because all our fraternities have those same minimums. So that means we don't make exceptions under any circumstances. Secondly, all potential new members must complete 4 educational requirements before they begin the recruitment or intake process. All first-year students, as well as upperclassmen who have indicated an interest in joining a fraternity, have been receiving monthly emails about the education requirements. If your student has not yet completed those requirements, please encourage him to contact our graduate assistants at greek@tulane.edu for makeup information. Also, please be aware that we provide options for students to complete the requirements remotely if they are unable to attend all of the in-person sessions. Our NPHC fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, brings in new members through a process called membership intake. Typically in early February, the organization will host an informational meeting to help prospective members learn about the programs and activities they do. Following the informational, they will accept membership applications and vote on which applicants to invite to membership. We do not know yet whether Alpha will conduct intake this spring, but if they choose to do so, we will publicize the date of their informational once we know it. Interfraternity Council fraternities bring in new members through a process called recruitment. Informal IFC recruitment activities take place throughout the fall semester at Tulane, but students may not join until the spring. So you may have heard your son talk about attending recruitment intro events over the last few weeks. During the fall, each IFC fraternity is required to host at least 2 introductory events for interested men. These tend to be pretty casual, and they usually consist of the types of activities the chapters do together, playing video games or intramurals, watching football or basketball, etc. We emailed all first-year men about these intro events several times throughout the fall, so hopefully your son took advantage of them as a way to meet fraternity members and start getting a sense of the different groups. From those intro events, and from meeting men in classes, in student organizations, and while going out, the fraternities decide who they are most interested in and form some relationships during the fall. Sometimes that means that first-year men are told in the fall that they will receive a bid or a membership invitation in the spring. But it's important to note that no bids are official until the spring, and only men who meet the eligibility requirements may receive and accept a bid. It's also important to note that many fraternities still recruit in January. Once spring classes begin, IFC recruitment kicks into high gear. Men interested in joining an IFC fraternity do not need to return to school early. That only applies to women participating in Panhellenic sorority recruitment. The men may return to campus when the residence halls open on Sunday, January 13th. On the evening of Monday, January 14th, we will host our mandatory recruitment convocation for all men who want to join an IFC fraternity. Of course, students who have class at that time are excused from attending convocation. During that first week of classes, each fraternity will host at least one recruitment event. These events are primarily focused on first-year students the fraternities haven't met and on transfer students. Students may attend events for as many or as few fraternities as they want, but we encourage them to keep their options open by attending several. The following week, January 21st to 24th, chapters will host invitation-only events so they can decide which students to give bids to. On Friday the 25th, our staff, along with students from the Interfraternity Council, will issue bids to students. Earlier that day, we will call any students who registered for recruitment but did not receive any bids. Some students may receive bids from more than one organization. If your son is one of those students, he will likely know immediately which organization he would like to join. However, if he needs some time to think it through, he has until Monday, January 28th to make a decision. While the overwhelming majority of students who want to join a fraternity at Tulane are able to do so, sometimes it doesn't work out. We work with our colleagues in other student affairs departments to make sure other options for campus involvement are available shortly after recruitment. The Spring Activities Expo is tentatively scheduled for Saturday, January 26th, and attending it is a great way to learn about other student organizations on campus that can fill the void if your son hoped to join a fraternity. And finally, it's important to know that not all Tulane students join fraternities in the spring of their first year. If your son is ineligible to participate this year, or if he participates and doesn't receive a bid, he can certainly go through recruitment next spring. As your son goes through recruitment or considers intake, he will likely ask your advice about how to decide which organization he's most interested in. The most important factor in determining this is the fit he feels and his comfort level with the men in the group. The next factor to consider plays into the first, and that is how much the organization's values resonate with your son. All national fraternities were founded on a set of guiding principles, and the members should be able to articulate both the values themselves and how the chapter's activities reflect those values. Encourage your son to ask questions of the members that will help him determine the values that are important to each fraternity. Having a legacy relationship to an organization can be another factor in helping a student find the right fit. This can be tough if someone in your family is an alumnus of one of our organizations, but we really encourage you to let your son make his own decision about which group is best for him, especially because chapters of the same organization can be very different on different campuses, and even our chapters here at Tulane change over the years. Tulane is not a campus that relies heavily on legacy relationships with alumni members. The great majority of students here don't have a legacy of Greek membership in their families. To the current members, a legacy relationship is an interesting fact about a prospective member, but because it's not something they generally have experienced themselves, it's frankly not as important to them as it is to the family of the potential member. We also want to make you aware of the dangers of your son joining an unrecognized or underground fraternity. The potential for hazing, alcohol abuse, and all-around trouble is much higher with unrecognized groups. Omega Psi Phi, also known as Omega or the Qs, is an NPHC fraternity that has never had a chapter at Tulane. However, in previous years, some Tulane graduate students who joined Omega at other schools as undergraduates have tried to recruit Tulane students to join the fraternity underground. We have worked with the regional officers of Omega to prevent that when possible. Kappa Sigma, known as Kappa Sig, Delta Kappa Epsilon, known as DEEC, Sigma Alpha Mu, known as SAMI, and Sigma Phi Epsilon, known as SIGEP, are all IFC organizations that had active chapters at Tulane in the past. These groups were closed either by their national organization or by the university because they were not willing to live up to our standards. We do not have any knowledge that DEEC or SIGEP are actively recruiting, but we do believe Kappa Sig and SAMI may be operating underground and trying to recruit first-year students. In recent years, we have heard reports of students who did not make connections to recognized fraternities in the fall semester and believed they were better off joining an underground fraternity than not joining any fraternity. It's important to understand that these groups of students are simply that, groups of students. They operate without any accountability or real structure and without the oversight, training, and education provided by our staff and their national headquarters staff. Your son may be placing himself in danger if he affiliates with any of these groups, and he may also face charges for violating the Code of Student Conduct. Shifting gears a bit, I want to talk a little about alcohol. You've undoubtedly seen the recent news stories about tragic deaths of fraternity members over the last several months. While all these stories were about men, it's important to note that women were not isolated from the issues related to alcohol either. Many of the most serious issues facing college students, from crime to sexual assault to hazing, are in some way related to alcohol. You're also likely aware that President Mike Fitz and Board of Tulane Chair Doug Hertz last year released a letter calling for the university community to change the campus's culture around alcohol use. We're fortunate that more than 2 years ago, our Vice President for Student Affairs convened a steering committee comprised of Tulane board members, senior administrators, faculty, staff, and alumni chapter advisors to create a long-range plan for Greek life here. That committee has recently shifted its focus on ways the Greek community can lead the way in changing the alcohol culture. Concurrently, our student leaders have been working with us to make improvements from the inside. Their efforts have resulted in improvements to our potential new member education series and in new initiatives to limit overconsumption of alcohol at fraternity and sorority parties. Last year, our fraternities voted to stop serving hard liquor at parties at their chapter houses and to require that alcohol be served at parties by a licensed third-party vendor utilizing a cash bar. This year, fraternities did not allow first-year students to attend events with alcohol at their chapter houses for the first 4 weeks of the semester. For those of you whose students will join the Greek community, we want to spend some time talking about hazing prevention. The university's definition of hazing is on your screen. Students joining fraternities should understand that their organizations can be held responsible for violating the hazing policy, even if the new members willingly participate in an activity that the university deems inappropriate. Experts have identified 3 general categories of hazing activities. The first is subtle hazing. This includes making new members perform tasks that older members don't have to perform. For example, cleaning up after a meal at the chapter house. Subtle hazing can also include things like making members, quote, earn the right to wear organization insignia, a forced workout regimen early in the morning, or being expected to camp out for a good spot on the Mardi Gras parade route. Next is harassment hazing. This may include assigning new members to perform pranks or wear silly clothing. It may also include lineups of new members during which they are expected to remember and recite insignificant details about the organization's history or about a particular member. Harassment hazing often includes a variety of demeaning acts or things that are misogynistic or homophobic. The final type of hazing is violent hazing. This type includes some of the sensational acts you may hear about in media reports: kidnapping new members, physical abuse, paddling, and forced alcohol consumption. At Tulane, subtle hazing and harassment hazing are the most common forms. Pressure to consume alcohol is more common than actual forced drinking, but it is an issue nonetheless. One thing we try to drill into the minds of our students is that there is a very slippery slope involved if they engage in so-called lower order hazing. They often don't know the physical and mental health histories of their new members. For example, pressure drinking can cause serious issues for a new member with a history of depression and anxiety. Another issue is that within an organization, different people can have very different views of what constitutes hazing. What seems harmless to some people can seem completely inappropriate and dangerous to others. In the last year, our Office of Student Conduct investigated complaints about potential hazing against 5 fraternities. One of those investigations resulted in the organization not being charged with hazing, but instead receiving educational intervention so they could improve their new member programming. A second investigation contributed to the decision of the National Board of Sigma Phi Epsilon to close its chapter at Tulane. 2 more investigations resulted in chapters being found not responsible for hazing, but responsible for alcohol and other policy violations. Those chapters were Phi Gamma Delta, known as Fiji, and Zeta Psi. Finally, our chapter of Sigma Chi was found responsible for violating the hazing policy, but the charge was minor enough that it resulted primarily in educational sanctions and not in a suspension of operations. It's important to note that all of these investigations were the result of concerns reported in confidence to the university. We also want to highlight some new state laws addressing hazing that were recently enacted by the Louisiana legislature. In response to the tragic hazing-related death last fall of Max Groover, an LSU fraternity new member, the state of Louisiana adopted 3 new statutes during their spring 2018 session. One of these criminalizes hazing, moving it from a misdemeanor to a felony with much more serious penalties than existed before. Another requires higher education institutions to provide hazing prevention education to their students. And finally, the 3rd new statute creates an obligation to offer reasonable assistance, including seeking medical assistance, to someone who has suffered serious bodily injury caused by reckless behavior, including hazing. If at any point during your son's time in a fraternity you have questions about whether he or a friend in a fraternity or sorority is being hazed, there are several resources you can consult. Of course, you can always call and speak to a member of our staff. Frankly, that is often the best method, as it allows us the opportunity to ask clarifying questions about what is happening and decide how best to address the situation. If you're uncomfortable doing that, you may file an online report at the website tulane.edu/concerns or leave a message on our hazing hotline at 504-862-3111. If you make a report or call to ask a question, you can ask that we keep your identity confidential. but I implore you to give us your contact information so we can contact you with follow-up questions. Parents are often concerned about reporting because they don't want their student to know it was they who called. As a parent myself, I completely understand that concern. However, I assure you that in my 9 years at Tulane, we have never revealed the source of a report about hazing. Nothing is more frustrating and concerning to us than receiving a report that something is happening that shouldn't be, but not having enough information to stop it. If nothing else, please give us as much detail as possible. What, when, where, and to whom something is happening or happened, so we have specifics to ask the organization's members. Not surprisingly, if all we can say is, we got a report that your chapter was hazing, it doesn't get us very far. We have far more success if we're able to ask about specific days and times and locations. For example, at the chapter house or at an older member's off-campus apartment, and activities. Finally, there's a great deal of information available online for parents who want to know more. A list of websites, in addition to greek.tulane.edu, is on your screen, and I encourage you to consult those. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have questions that were not answered by this tutorial, please feel free to contact us. We look forward to seeing your sons in the spring.